not everybody has your best interest at heart. Some people have agendas.
That's right.
Most people don't care about your crappy company. Most people don't care about your crappy job. They just want a job at that point in time.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's important we need to understand that. So a lot of people are feeling like, Brian, that they're active. I send in 30 applications a day.
If you ever go onto like a LinkedIn or an Indeed or something and you see confidential employer, they haven't fired the guy yet, but they're firing the guy you're going to replace.
Ooh.
Applying for jobs is the single hardest way to get a job. That's what 99% of people do 99% of the time in their job search.
Right. The difference maker still is who you know.
That's 100% accurate. That's the very best. So
it's the game changer.
So here's the hierarchy of finding a job.
Okay. I recently sat down with Brian Creeley, who is a former HR exec. He was laid off in an unceremonious fashion and then launched a very successful YouTube channel to which he helps so many people navigate the world of work. We talk about layoffs, how to prepare for them, how to recover from them, interviews, and so much more. This is going to help you win in the world of work. Check it out. All right, Brian, I want to get your view on some new data here. This is a Forbes article. More than 70% of job seekers believe the current labor market is not conducive to landing a new employment opportunity. This is because the current job search is taking longer and longer. More data on this. This was from the Josh Bersin Company and Workforce Solutions business. AMS had a study as well that said the recruitment process now averages about 43 days. And the report says it's unsustainable if companies are to remain competitive and keep pace with the fast changing needs of their industry. So there's two issues there we'll dive into in the data. First issue, are 70% of job seekers right, or are they just feeling that it's really hard? Your opinion on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I see that sentiment all the time I post a lot on LinkedIn, and I see the comments that come in, and people are feeling, you hear this data that's produced mainstream, and it says job market's great, layoffs are at an all-time low, the employment rate is great, and I think just the reality is people are looking around just going like, this just doesn't feel this way. And I think the underwriting sentiment that I'm hearing is it's never been this hard to find a job.
Yeah.
Like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I had to look for a job, it wasn't even this bad. And I think that the numbers are misleading. I think that if you look at what happened in 2020, this has been the most topsy-turvy job market in the last 5 years that I've ever seen in my entire career.
Without question, yeah.
And I liken it to an employment pendulum. It's like swinging back and forth.
Yeah.
Most of the time, unfortunately for us, the employee is buried in the employer's side. They have they hold all the cards, they have all the power. The employment pendulum swung real heavy this way towards the employer during the 2020 pandemic. Everybody reacted. Layoffs went through the roof. It's one of the worst times to ever look for. I actually lost my job in 2020, which was the catalyst for me starting, talking about this stuff in a more, more public way.
Sure. But
then we found that the employment pendulum swung back really hard in 2020. Right. So what happened is all these companies, knee-jerk reaction. I think companies look for any opportunities. What's that saying? The never let a good crisis go to waste.
That's right.
So they had all this, maybe trimming the fat is, I hate the term, but that's kind of what they use. They trimmed the fat in 2020. The job market, the employment market kind of plummeted. Everybody was laid off. And then they realized once the supply chain kind of turned back on, I realized, oh crap, we need people. Yeah, we need people. And we saw this major hiring boom, but in reality, it wasn't that there was these new jobs being created. It was just replacing the jobs that had been laid off. And so we see these numbers like, oh, the hiring market's great and everybody was getting these offers. Well, all of these companies had reshuffled their resources and started hiring, like software developers, for example, were a huge boom. You couldn't trip out your front door without landing 2 or 3 better offers.
That's exactly right.
And so it was like a heyday. And I think that the employees at that time felt like, hey, we finally have the power. So it's like this whole like thing about like the quiet quitting, the great resignation, all these like terms that we saw kind of coming out during this period of time started happening. And just as fast as it turned on, where it was like the heyday of employment for the employees, the pendulum swung this way, suddenly it swings back this way really hard. And the reality is that I don't think there was ever, the job numbers are misleading in that I don't think that there was ever a lot of jobs created to begin with. I think it was just a replacement of the jobs that were eliminated in 2020, and a lot of those jobs that were eliminated or being replaced and are now being reported in our numbers, this is my opinion at least, is they took a full-time headcount and then they turned it into 2 part-time headcounts or a contracted headcount. And so the numbers still say, hey, we're adding jobs to the economy, but the reality is it's kind of like the shuffling of the shell game.
That's right. Well, let's just be honest. The adjustment by the Bureau of Labor Statistics that was widely reported earlier this month, they adjusted by almost 1 million jobs, or right at that number, 800,000 to 1 million jobs.
Yeah.
If
it was around 800.
800,000. So again,
that was a second revision too.
Second revision. That's exactly right. So to your point, jobs are scarce.
100%.
I don't think that you can say that they're abundant right now, even with the unemployment rate still in a very historically good place. I mean, low 4s is historically good. Not an all-time low. All right, I'll talk about that second piece. Do you agree with this assessment from this data that the current 43 days is unsustainable? That seems a bit of an exaggeration.
Yeah, I don't think, we have, in the recruiting world, we are measured, and this is any company that's worth their weight. In fact, Ramsey Solutions probably has a time to fill metric as well.
That's right.
Recruiters in talent acquisition departments are measured on the time to fill, which is the time a job is open until the time that an offer is accepted. And that's a commonly accepted measurement. I would say industry, across all industries, probably around 45 days time to fill, with some harder to fill, like probably 60 days time to fill for some tech roles that were particularly difficult. So 45 days time to fill is not or 43 is not an unsustainable. It's a very common.
I was curious. I'm not sure why they feel that that's unsustainable, given the fact that I think you just revealed what I agree with, which is jobs are scarce. So there's plenty of candidates. And I think if nothing else, companies have a little bit more time on their hands, because there are a lot of people applying, a lot of people available, which is why we're seeing 70% of workers are going, it's really hard to find a job now.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of, there's a big disconnect between the number of, almost too many chefs in the kitchen when you're trying to make these decisions. And I think from a candidate's perspective, they're just trying to find a job, but companies want to go round after round of interview, and that extends the job, the offer process, and that can be very frustrating. But to the candidate, it can seem like that's the deal. But in reality, I think 45 days time to fill is consistent. But there's, to your point, there's just not a lot of jobs out there.
I have a hunch, just based on what I'm hearing from callers, that AI and its ascent into the screening process, which makes a lot of sense for companies. I mean, if I put myself in their position, you can get through a lot of screening and all this kind of stuff, and we can make it more efficient. But it feels like it's making it really frustrating for people that are seeking employment, because it's so much easier to apply on one hand, but on the other hand, it's also a lot easier, and I use the word easier loosely, to get dumped because of AI software. If you've got a keyword in there that flags you, I saw a report that they felt like over 2 million qualified workers were dismissed by AI during 2021 because of that software. So is that also a factor in why 70% of American workers are saying, man, it's really hard to get hired? What's your take on that as an HR guy?
Yeah, that's a Pandora's box for sure. I think it's probably one of the most common memes I've seen in the job search world is, AI chews up my resume and spits it out. The reality is that there's a big misconception about how AI is used in job search, from a recruiter's perspective.
All right, let's clear that up.
Yeah, so
because I'm buying a little bit of that.
The reality is that there's always been automation in the applicant tracking systems, and so the AI systems are not necessarily set up to reject. In other words, it's not self-aware. It's not making decisions on your behalf as the recruiter. And as a recruiter, we don't want systems to make decisions on it. But I want to see all the candidates so that I can make sure that I find the right person.
Okay, so there's a myth that we're busting right out of the gate.
100%. Yeah, it's a myth. Now there is such a thing as keywords, and sometimes if you're I'll use myself as an example. There was a job that I had posted one time. Within 26 hours, we posted it on a Tuesday at like 4 p.m. It was for a senior IT, like a VP level IT leader at a technical startup. And we got 750 applications in the first 26 hours. So by the time we came by close of business the following day, they shut the rec down. There were so many candidates, and 99% of them, 98% of them were people that had never even worked in technology, didn't have any degrees, didn't have any qualifications. They were completely unrelated to the job posting. So it's like, how do you get that number down to a manageable number that you can actually see the people who do have those skills and still, but not have them eliminate people who legitimately have the skills and maybe don't have the best resume. So that's the keyword.
I want to jump in because you just said something that I think we've got to discuss.
Absolutely.
Okay. Why in the world are people applying for things that if they had any sense at all, they would realize what you just said? That like this huge chunk of them aren't even qualified. Why are they applying?
Yeah, and I want to get back to the AI point too.
No, we're not going to leave it. Yeah, but I this is a quick interruption. There's a real quick take.
100%,
give me 20 seconds on that.
It's the proverbial take your shot. Like in hockey, you take your shot. The reality with AI, with applicants being able to apply very quickly to jobs like I'm thinking like the LinkedIn Easy Apply. I mean, all I gotta do is just hit a button.
There's no skin in the game.
And now there's AI systems, like on the job seeker side, there's AI systems that will apply for you, and like hundreds of applications at a time. So it's like you can just take your shot. And with the remote jobs nowadays, people can be sitting in India or in Europe and be applying to American jobs, and there's no barrier to entry.
All right. Well, back to AI, but I wanted to kind of make a point here. You're part of the problem then.
Me?
No, not you. The people that are applying.
Yeah.
No, it's your fault.
Oh man,
welcome to the studio. This is all your fault. No, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, people don't make it easy on themselves when they're taking their shot and they're marginally qualified. What I would do as a litmus test is go through the job posting and look at the bullet points. And if I'm going bullet point by bullet point through, and I'm saying, do I have this thing? If so, where's it clearly reflected on my resume? And maybe even more importantly, how recently was it reflected? So if you did this thing 20 years ago, it's probably not going to be as relevant. But I'm going to go through bullet point by bullet point through my resume, and I'm going to say, where have I done this, and how clearly is it reflected on my resume? And if I'm going through and out of the 10 bullet points that they have on their job posting, I'm going to be only matching maybe 2, maybe 3. You have to take a kind of a look, really look at yourself and say, am I really a good fit for the job? And you can't be too disappointed when you get a rejection. Yeah. But as far as the AI is concerned, how do we get 1,000 candidates down to 15 or 20 that are actually reasonably fit for the role? And so they do use keywords on some level, but not as much as people think. We would actually, and that's 750 candidates that I was referring to. My recruiting teams went through each candidate looking for it. Now, there is kick-out questions. So the kick-out question might be, are you legally eligible to work in the country without sponsorship? Or are you at least 18 years of age? In that case, the ATS systems, the applicant tracking systems, are automatically filtering those people out. You get an automatic rejection. If you get rejected based on you submitted an application, you've met all the basic requirements, and you get an auto reject, it's almost certainly because a recruiter has programmed something into the system to auto reject you. It's not the AI that is self-aware. I mean, if AI ever becomes self-aware,
right,
Lord help us all.
Yeah. Let's go find a bunker.
But the fact of the matter is that these tools are, I think people, this is going to be probably controversial, but I think people conveniently let that be an excuse for why they're not truly reflecting on themselves and
I agree with that.
And looking at their resume and saying, okay, if I have the experience that the job is calling for and I'm getting auto rejected consistently, is my resume, is my hiring it's even beyond resume. It's like, is my hiring presentation truly showing my fit for the role?
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of timing associated with it. Once recruiters will get our job, when we get a job in, you got to keep in mind, an average corporate recruiter is probably working on 15 or 20 different jobs at the same time. And as soon as they get a new job assigned to them, their goal is, because they have time to fill metrics, that's how they keep their job. So they've got to get candidates into the process as quickly as they can. So they're going to screen through. They're going to try to get 5 submitted candidates. If you're the hiring manager, I'm going to submit 5 candidates to you as quickly as I can.
Okay.
Then I'm going to go on to my next job. So all the candidates, once I hit my 5, all of the candidates who come in beyond that are just sitting in limbo.
Yeah.
They're not even being looked at.
Right.
So they sit in limbo. Then I'm going on to this job. Now, if these 5 candidates get rejected for whatever reason by the hiring manager, then I'll go back and revisit the rec.
Right.
But there's another added component here that people don't realize. If I sat around waiting for people, because I'm getting everybody shooting their proverbial shot,
right,
if I'm waiting around for that job posting to collect resumes and like praying that there's a candidate come in, I'm not going to keep my job as a recruiter for very long, because I might go through 100 applications and only find one.
Right.
But I need to screen them. I need to make sure that our compensation expectations consistent. Do you actually fit the job requirements? Are you able to be located where the job is? There's a lot of reasons why people might get rejected. And if you don't work out, I might need to have 2 candidates for every one, or maybe even 5 candidates for every one I submit to the hiring manager. So I'm going to go off and source my own candidates at the same time. So not only are you up against that competition of the 1,000 people that apply, but the recruiter is also going off and finding their own candidates.
This is really good. I love that you just unpacked that, because I'm gonna put something that I've said, and I'm gonna call it a common sense solution. And this could be fun. Brian may smack this. We'll see what he says. But I wrote an entire book called The Proximity Principle on this idea that all those things being true that you just said, the difference maker still is who you know. And you got it, just as the recruiter is out there doing their proactive strategy that you just laid out so well, I'm saying you gotta apply, and you gotta go through the system. But man, you're trying to find somebody that you know in that building who, if just nothing else, will agree to walk your resume into the hiring manager and go, hey, my friend Ken, I know him. Here's how I know him. I say a couple things about me that are nice. And just say, he's already in the system, but I'm bringing the resume by. And it's nothing more than a personal touch. Is that archaic? Is that a waste of time? You can be honest. I'm holding my arms up. Take a shot.
No, that's 100% accurate. That's the very best. So
it's the game changer.
So here's the hierarchy of finding a job.
Okay.
The first in the pole position candidate is going to be the internal applicant.
Right.
If you're an internal applicant, you automatically move to the front of the line. That doesn't mean you're automatically going to get hired, but it means that you're going to at least be considered.
That's right.
Every company I've ever worked at, I've worked for huge companies that everybody knows. I've worked for very small companies. Every single company I've ever worked for, the internal applicant always gets preferential treatment as far as we're going to at least interview you.
I agree with that.
So, and that's how it should be.
I think it's exactly right.
And
we already know that they're not a derelict, that they fit, so we're going to give them a shot.
Yeah, and in fact, if I've ever whenever I've lost a job personally, or I've recruited a job where an internal applicant comes in at the 11th hour, yeah, it's frustrating as a job seeker, but it's also a corporate culture that I want to work for. I want the ability. If I was the internal employee, I want the ability, especially when that internal you don't even have to be the most qualified candidate. They'll take, if you have good equity inside of your organization, you can oftentimes your resume will not be the strongest resume that's in front of the hiring manager. I guarantee it. But because they know you as a known commodity, they'll take a risk on you. They'll say, we know this person.
That's just wisdom.
Yeah. So internal applicants, number one.
Okay.
The second one is employee referral. That's the second in hierarchy, and it's a near second. So if you can find somebody to submit you as an employee referral, that's the second best way to get a job or get your foot in the door. Because just like, if you go in and you suggest, hey, I'm gonna this is a guy that I'm gonna put my name on. Now it's like you're stamping it as, if Ken says it's okay, then it's okay. Then this guy's okay. So then after that, then it would be sourced candidates. So that means candidates that I, the recruiter, go off and find, because I'm typing in the keywords in LinkedIn and finding the candidates that have those things. That's why optimized profiles are really important.
Right.
And then sourced or recruit or inbound applications.
Sure.
The candidates who apply for jobs are, I hate to say, at the bottom of the barrel.
Well, I think that's I think you're absolutely right. I think it's important we need to understand that. So a lot of people are feeling like, Brian, that they're active. I send in 30 applications a day. But if you're doing it that way only, you are bottom of the totem pole.
Applying for jobs is the single hardest way to get a job. And the ironic part about it is, is that's what 99% of people do 99% of the time in their job search.
Right. Yeah.
But then there's this, how do you
might as well buy a lottery ticket while you're at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I mean, you might as well, especially when you're, when you're applying. I mean, I saw this one job posting, and it was probably a couple years ago at the heyday of the job market for the job seeker, and it had like 20,000 applicants on LinkedIn. When you go in now, there's a little bit of a misleading number there, because that's just the number of people that click on the job posting, and even if they don't
20,000 applicants.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, at that point, how do you even stand out? So if you can find a way to become an employer referral, that's obviously the very best way. So that's where the networking becomes so important.
Love that. Hey, folks, I want to tell you about Aiden. He started at Bethel Tech 2 weeks after graduating high school, and less than a year later, he's 19 and working as a full-stack software developer. He loved the idea of being able to work at his own pace, but what he really thought was cool is Bethel Tech's faith-based learning environment and being with classmates who had a similar worldview. Now, if this is you, or if you have a son or a daughter that's looking for the next step out of high school and they may be tech-minded, at least interested, you need to talk to Bethel Tech. Listen to this. Fortune Magazine named them as a top 10 best UX UI bootcamp for 2024. And right now, they're offering you 10% off because you listen and watch the Ken Coleman Show. They also allow you to pay cash, and I know you'll like that. Go to BethelTech.net/Ken Coleman for details. Terms and conditions apply. We're going to get into some really popular topics for you and have a fun discussion on this, but I've got to take on something that honestly shocks me about the corporate world, but I'm interested for your take. So we shared an article on the show recently about companies that are actively posting jobs or leaving jobs up that were previously posted that they have no desire to fill. I called it corporate catfishing. All right.
Yeah.
And it went viral because I think people are outraged by it.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I get it. I actually said I think it's irresponsible.
100%.
I think it's wrong. I think it's manipulative. And then those reasons given for it were we want to, A, put pressure on current people on the team to make them think that they're replaceable, which I find that to be at the height of manipulation and awful, what I call bad bossery. Makes me want to just scream on behalf of people. The other reason given is they're trying to actually catch some fish, and let's see if we want to keep them or not. Again, manipulative. Do you agree that this is happening? Is it more prevalent or less prevalent than maybe it's been in the past?
100% yes, it's happening. And is it more prevalent? I would say probably is more prevalent, especially in a bad job market. And I'll give you a little insight into why this is happening. And for the record, I do not agree with it either. I think it's complete crap.
Right.
So what will end up happening very frequently is a job it either could be an evergreen job where they're always filling people, so there's always a job posting always up, or if they eliminate a position, oftentimes senior HR or talent acquisition leaders will say, let's put together we'll call it a pipelining rec. Just put a job requisition. I use these terms, and I realize not.
Yeah. I'm staying pace here.
Yeah. So, I know some of my audience always says every time I say wreck, they go, "What a train wreck? What is it?" Like, what kind of is a train wreck? And it's a job wreck.
That's true.
So they'll put together. They'll say, "Well, let's put together a pipeline rec for this job." And what that means is like we're going to post a job where we don't actually have a verified headcount for or approved headcount, and we're just going to collect applications. And the reason is, we think we'll probably hire at some point in time in the future. And this job has typically been a very difficult one for us to fill. So let's just be proactive. And it's almost like justifying your existence kind of an activity.
Yeah.
Let's just go and post this job and we'll collect applicants for some future maybe hiring event, and we'll get a head start on it. And as recruiters, for the record, absolutely hate pipelining recs because we begrudgingly have to, like, your boss is telling you make this pipeline rec, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that has happened. I've actually had organizations where I've had to push back on my boss and say, this isn't a good idea. We shouldn't be doing a pipeline rec because let's face it, if you're actively searching for a job, you're an active candidate in that space with that interest in that company for a very short period of time. It's a container of time. Me doing a pipeline rec, unless it's some alpha employer that you have had, it's your dream company that you're hoping at some point will give you an opportunity. Most people don't care about your crappy company. Most people don't care about your crappy job. They just want a job at that point in time. And then after a period of time, the candidate pool ages, not in literally like aging, but like the candidate pool gets stale.
Right.
Like the candidates are no longer available. And so I've never had a pipeline wreck that actually produce fruit in the long term. So that's going to be one of them. And then I think a lot of these jobs that are posted to kind of like never taken down is just it's bad recruiting. It's just bad recruiters, and they're not hitting the closed button. I mean, with the applicant tracking systems, it's really easy. It's just it's supposed to manage these recs for you.
Right.
When you're finished, you hit the fill button.
Yeah.
There's an automatic pop-up that says, okay, are you ready to close out the job requisition, and then send an automatic reject to all the other candidates, and you hit yes, and it automatically does it. So there's no excuse.
And see, all of this, by the way, leads to what we kind of started the conversation out, where people just begin to get really bitter, lose a lot of hope. And I just think it backfires all the way around.
Yeah,
I'm fascinated. I can't believe that leaders could defend that practice.
Yeah, I kind of jokingly say, that's not really even joking. I said, I think every single executive leadership team from like director on up should apply for their own job anonymously
and see what it feels like.
and just to see how they're treated. That'll clean up hiring very quickly.
If there was a HR president of the United States, you would win in a landslide if that was your one issue.
Yeah.
Right there. I think the American people would go, that would be great. Why don't you apply for your jobs and see how that works out for you? Wow, that's really interesting stuff. Okay, I want to get into some topics that have performed very well for you, and I want to dive into them a little bit. One, your coworkers are not your friends. I learned the hard way. Really popular video for you. I think I know where you're going with that, but I want to hear your story, and I want to dive into whether or not you think friendships at work do matter, and we should be intentional to be friends with our coworkers. The caveat on that statement, Brian, is I'm not saying you go vacation with them, but I'm saying in that 8-hour block or 10-hour block, you spend a third of your life at work, right? Mm-hmm. I should have friends in the workplace. Doesn't mean we're hanging out afterwards. I believe that. I think the data from Gallup shows that that's a positive, but I want to just throw that at you because you hit a nerve with that.
Oh, yeah.
So talk to me. First of all, tell me what happened. You learned the hard way.
Yeah, I think a lot of people learn the hard way if you read through the comments on that one.
Oh, yeah. I did read the comments.
Yeah.
They were like, amen. I mean, you were on a nerve.
Yeah, and so, the deal with friends in the workplace, I have friends that I've even maintained contact with. Some of them I went to my wedding, so I've got good friends in the workplace. So this isn't me saying you should never have friends.
Right.
What the point of it is to be very careful with how comfortable you get in the workplace setting, because inevitably some of those things will get back to people that you don't like. If you're going to say something to somebody in the workplace, you have to be comfortable enough that whoever you're saying it about
stays there.
If they were standing in the room with you, would you be comfortable still saying that thing?
Yeah.
Because that's I've had an experience where that happened to me. We were sitting over a drink or two, and he asked me a question about a new supervisor at his location, and I just made what I thought was a very innocent comment, like, yeah, he's great. We're working through some things, to help him become even more effective leader. But everything's going great so far. And then he took that, twisted it, went back to his manager and said, Brian thinks that you're an ineffective leader. He thinks that you aren't a good supervisor. And so then I get called into my boss's office, and she's saying, did you say this? And I'm going like, oh my gosh, that was not the context at all.
Of course.
And now I had to be like very careful, walk around. Now I made some obvious mistakes. I shouldn't have been having these conversations, especially as an HR guy. I shouldn't have been having those. So it was like a learning lesson for me. But what I learned is that not everybody has your best interest at heart. Some people have agendas.
That's right.
And so you just have to be very careful. Now, obviously, I've had some very close work friends in my life that I've maintained very close relationships that I can trust implicitly. But I would say be careful who you hang out at the water cooler with. And you are associated with leaders in particular will associate with who you hang out with. So if they go in the lunchroom and you're hanging out with all the gossips who aren't going anywhere and you want to go somewhere, that's your brand. Everything we do in our career is a personal brand,
whether you like it or not. Exactly right.
And that was the point of that video, is just be very mindful of your personal brand.
All right, I want to take on another topic that I can't wait to hear what you're going to share with us. I coach people all the time, Brian. I've said this on major media hits when people ask me about all these tips for job interviews and all this kind of stuff, and I'm not an HR expert. So all of my advice is what I would do based on common sense. And one of the things that I've espoused for a long time is that workers need to start to view the job interview as it's more important to them than it is the actual employer. In other words, this is for you to figure out if you want to be there. But I think the default mode, because you're trying to win the job, is I'm trying to impress them. I want them to like me and pick me. But I have always espoused, you need to walk into this job interview and have the mentality, I'm trying to decide if I want to be here. In other words, you answer their questions, but you are also actively asking questions and discerning and paying attention. And you better have some list of questions to figure out, is this a good fit for me? Not am I a good fit for them? Thoughts on that?
That absolutely is. We're interviewing the employer just as much as they're interviewing us, but with the caveat, if you don't have any power in the employment arrangement, if you're not in demand, you're just praying for a job because you need to solve for the unemployment your unemployment problem. It's a lot harder to be picky and say, I'm going to interview you and I'm not going to take this job, even though
I think that's the right asterisk. Yes.
I'm going to be losing my job. So if we can come in with a sense of power, in other words, we've reclaimed control in our career and we walk in as an in-demand employee 100%. I think that the dynamic, I kind of use a metaphor for this. Imagine and I think that this might help put some context into the job seeking, especially in an interview when how you present yourself. Imagine that the employer is shopping for a car. They're the family of four that walks onto the car dealership, and you are, as the job seeker, are the car dealer.
Okay.
They're shopping for a wish list. Maybe their wife is with them and she's got very strong needs. She needs a three-row SUV. She wants it to be a certain color. It has to have captain's chair so she can get back to the back seat so she can put her car seats in there and the stroller, and it's got to fit all this. And she's got this laundry list, and they walk into the dealership asking for this, and you've got this parking lot full of all of these unrelated cars. You got your cargo vans, you got your pickup trucks, you got the sports cars, and you're telling them somewhere in this back here there is what you're looking for. You can go ahead and just start walking through the aisles, and hopefully you'll find what it is you're looking for. Then they're going to turn around and look across the street at the 1,000 other dealerships.
That's a great point. That's right.
And the one across the street has the exact car that they're looking for up on that pedestal that's spinning around and saying 3-row SUV, captain's chairs. And so in other words, they're the buyer. You're the seller. I hate the term seller because that implies something icky to me. It's like marketer.
I understand, but I understand what you're saying. So you're trying to show them, hey, well, we actually have this function. I have this function.
Yeah.
I can do this.
So of course you have to have the right buyer, Right. Anytime we've ever sold anything in our lives, you want to make sure that you're selling to somebody that you also believe is a good fit for you. But you have to be in demand. If they come in and you have the only widget and it's really in demand and they're like clamming at wanting to get that widget from you or that car from you, then you have more power. And now you can be more selective. So
let's talk some more about that then, because that was more of a setup to go, okay, what are some red flags? So as the employee, I'm sitting in there, and to use your phrase, I've got some power. In other words, I'm not in desperation. I just want to keep moving up the ladder, or I want to get into that sweet spot, right? And so you're sitting there. What are some red flags that you go, you've got to be aware of this? And then do we immediately run, or is there more digging on some of these red flags? I wanted you to take that.
Yeah, I think one of the first red flags that I would look for would be if they're changing the scope of the role when I get there. So I should know very clearly why I'm in the room to begin with. Like, what does this job actually give me for my career that it will help me propel me to not just this job, but the next job beyond it? So if they start switching and moving the goalposts on the job, or they say like, hey, we think you'd be great for this other job, so we're going to interview, and they switch it up, that's a red flag. You have to be very mindful of that and knowing where, does this new job actually, you don't want to give the keys of your career bus away and let them start taking control. So that's one. I think if they get cute with the compensation, like the recruiter's going to have a conversation with you in the beginning of the interview process about compensation expectations. There's a whole thing about that. But if they get to the end and suddenly they're asking you things like the term or the phrasing, what's the minimum acceptable that you'll take? It's like, wow, you're trying to give me the absolute lowest that you can. It's like you're gonna lowballing me right out of the gate. That's
now I do feel like we're haggling. For a car.
Well, what's the most that you're gonna give me?
Right.
So that's a red flag, and it's like I don't want to work at a company that is. If I'm being realistic in my expectation, I don't want to work for a company that's going to try to nickel and dime me.
Right.
And it's you can look at why is the position open to begin with? If they just laid off the guy or fired the guy right before you, or here's an even bigger one. If you ever go onto like a LinkedIn or an Indeed or something and you see confidential employer, that means that they're firing. They haven't fired the guy yet, but they're firing the guy you're going to replace.
Ooh.
That's one that I would not want to touch at all, because that means that if they're doing it to that person, they're certainly willing to do it to you as well. And then I think like a red flag too would be looking at their track record. You know, if they laid off a whole bunch of staff 3 months earlier, then they replace it with a contract role that has no benefits, has half the salary, and then they're trying to get you to be excited about it. It's like you just like cut your entire workforce, and now like they did with recruiting a lot. Like the recruiting teams got decimated, and then 3 months later, the companies realized they still needed to hire people. They don't have recruiters to do it, so suddenly you start seeing these job postings. Now it's all contracted jobs, paying half, a quarter, of what they were paying before.
And I know, but tell us. I mean, what does that imply? What are we taking from that kind of action?
Yeah, they don't value the employee.
That's exactly right.
You know?
You're a number on a spreadsheet.
100%.
And that's what we've seen so much in some of these massive corporate layoffs over the last 2 years. You know, it's just the minute it starts to affect the stock price, you are a cost. And they look at that and they go, you aren't a person. You're a unit of production. And right now you cost me more than I want to for my stock price. So I'm going to lay you off. And there's no emotion. We heard stories. I know you saw it, people showing up to work, getting there early, 5:30 in the morning to get ahead. Nothing shows more character, or maybe too much work, we'll say that. But at 5:30 in the morning, your fob doesn't work.
Or your email doesn't turn on.
There's that. We saw that too. Yeah, nothing works.
You don't even get you get the Zoom pre-recorded Zoom message to your personal email. You can't even log onto your work computer. Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head with you're literally, I think a lot of people have learned this, especially older generations who maybe hadn't experienced the same mindset of you're a number on a spreadsheet. And that's the minute you no longer serve the future purpose of the company, not even the past. You could have just closed the biggest deal ever and gotten exceeds expectations, and then the next day be laid off because some new leader comes in, decides they're going in a different direction. And it all boils back to reclaiming control in your career. You know, we have to be in the driver's seat of our career. And if you're always in a reactive place, if you just you become apathetic in your career, you just kind of lay back and you just let your career come to you, then those are the people that are most at risk.
I want to get your opinion on a really dire situation. You know, Ramsey Solutions, we're always coaching people on making good decisions with their money. I can't tell you how many times I've given advice to say, you know, I think you can put up with this about 30 more days, 60 days. You can put up with this long enough to find some more income. But I'm throwing this at you. I know you've talked about this before. Are there situations where you would advise, look, I know you may not be able to make it to the next paycheck. You're a paycheck to paycheck worker, which is a lot of people in this country. But these things, are there some things where you go, full stop, get out of there today? What are they? Yeah,
I mean, sure. I mean, obviously it's the last resort. I never recommend anybody just quit their job without a contingency or a very clear strategy in mind. But there are some circumstances where absolutely there are, I'm thinking like the very toxic workplaces where you're asked to do something illegal or you're being subjected to some bona fide harassment that it causes harm to you. I think if you're losing like physically, if you're manifesting physical ailments, like having to go on anti-anxiety medication, you're losing weight, it's manifesting itself in a very bona fide. I think those are the circumstances where I would recommend that you look for a different job. As far as quitting your job just because I don't like the way my boss talks to me sometimes, or I feel like I'm underpaid. It's like you can do that, but you have to keep in mind that the job market isn't good, and you may find yourself the grass isn't always greener.
Right.
And I think a lot of people have found that hard. The Great Resignation period was a time when everybody was doing that, but there's a lot of people that have found that when they participated in the Great Resignation, that's now backfired on them.
It's called the Great Regret.
The Great Regret, yeah.
Millions of people identified. I said, okay, well, I'm going to go take the bigger paycheck, and it was not better. One of the things I'd love to get your take on, I've taken this call a lot on the show, and that is the person who's been let go. It's not a layoff. They were fired. And these are not egregious situations. They messed up, and they willingly admit it. Okay, you know what? I wish I'd had a little more grace there, but you know what? I got fired. And sometimes it's also a personality conflict as being reported to me. And it's, oh, the boss didn't like me. We didn't do well, and they got rid of me. And I had good performance reviews, blah, 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 blah. But I don't think that I can use them as a reference. I'm really nervous. I'm going to go look for another job. And these new people are going to check on me. And I feel like my old boss is going to trash me. Mm-hmm. Or they're worried just about the scenario in general. How do I narrate this going forward?
Yeah.
And I have my opinion on it, but I want to know from the HR guy, what are you looking for to hear in those situations? What are red flags for HR and hiring managers for somebody who's coming off being fired? How do you overcome that?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is, if you're being fired for a core competency on the job or a core component, I would really understand, try to maybe do some soul searching on, is this the right fit for you, this career type,
right.
If that is. But I would always recommend looking for the positive, like what did you learn in the situation, and then recognize it and own it. If you just kind of make an excuse and you don't own it, I think that's probably worse than
I do too.
than just owning that it was a bad situation. I didn't hit my numbers for this particular quarter because of some things, but what I ended up doing was and then tie it back into the learning. I went and got retraining. I did these 2 or 3 things, and as a result, I'm ready to take this as a learning school of hard knocks, and I'm ready to show you that I'm able to really do this.
That's really the only way to overcome it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of the. If you go in and just say, yeah, they fired me, and my boss was a jerk, and I didn't like him.
All right, let's say you do what you just said. You play that right. They're still going to call and check your references. They're going to call that previous boss almost every time. True or false? How much does that happen?
So let's talk front end references versus back end reference or backdoor references. So the front end reference, in theory, most companies are going to be reluctant to give them out, because if a boss says this guy's worthless, don't hire him, you could, in theory, say slander, and you could go out there, you could take action against that. So a lot of companies' policies, especially bigger corporations who are limiting liability, like HR departments, their job is to limit liability. They'll limit liability and tell the hiring managers you're not allowed to accept it. It has to go through, any check for reference has to go through the HR department, and basically it's just name, rank, and serial number. That's all they'll
So
share.
what is the difference between a front end and a back end?
Well, the back end is if you didn't give permission. So if I gave you permission to talk to my boss and I gave you the direct number, then you can call, no problem. But if a back end reference is dangerous, and you won't know that they're happening. It's especially in an industry that's kind of small, and people kind of go from company to company in a relatively small sphere of if that's a small industry. What will happen is hey, I think my Jim over in accounting actually used to work at this guy's company. Let me go ask Jim. Hey, Jim, do you know about this guy? And he's like, let me check and see what I can find. And he'll call people that he knows still at the company, and he'll come back. You don't want to touch this guy.
Right. How much? So this is kind of enlightening for me, and I would imagine for a lot of people. So the larger the company, they're not even going to check the references unless you give permission.
Unless you give permission, yeah. So you
don't have to worry about it although let me ask this: what happens if they say we'd like to get your permission to call references and you say no? Isn't that also
that's a red flag for them to you as a candidate?
Yeah.
So, well, why won't you let? And if you don't have a boss or a supervisor that's willing to give you the reference, and we usually like to see somebody that's most recent boss. That's the best one that you can get.
Exactly. So if you don't have a good one, how do you maneuver that?
Yeah, I might say, like, if in the case where I was not going to have a good reference from my most immediate boss, I might say something like, based on my exit, it probably, I don't feel comfortable with you speaking directly with him. However, I've got 2 or 3 other previous bosses that would be happy to speak to you.
And don't you also have to say, and I can tell you why?
Yeah, and I would probably give some, I would probably, because if you don't, they're going to start, you don't want them to create the story for you.
Yeah, and back to what you were saying earlier, with so many applicants, if you create even the smallest amount of friction, you run the risk of just being tabled, correct?
If you're If you're not considered to be a
top tier
player. Yeah, if you're a top tier player and you're checking a lot of boxes and it's hard for them to find that candidate on the open market, and you have like maybe you work at a competitor company that has the exact skill set that you're looking for, you're probably more willing to deal with some of that stuff. And most employers, most hiring managers realize that, there's some bad bosses out there. You're going to get some benefit of the doubt. I don't think it's a blanket statement to say, oh, if you have a bad reference or if you got fired, that you're not hireable again. Yeah. But it does require you to play a little bit of chess with your hiring presentation.
And doesn't this highlight again what we were talking about, that in this situation where you were let go or you walked because it wasn't tenable anymore and you don't have that strong reference from that last employer, this again highlights the importance of connections within the company where someone else can tell a much more consistent and accurate narrative.
Yeah, and that's why, we have a lot of, it's a double standard. 2 weeks notice is a double standard, and it's really more for the employee's benefit than it is the employer. You're trying not to screw over your fellow coworkers if you just leave and all that work has to go somewhere. And then it's also to try to maintain relationships.
I want to get your advice on self-awareness. I think it's a superpower in our personal life and in our professional life. And I honestly, after coaching 10,000 people, I think there's a stunning lack of self-awareness in the workplace. So with that being the setup for you, what are some signs people should probably be aware they may be pushing me out or trying to get me to leave so that it doesn't sneak up on them? I mean, that's what I'm curious about. Are there some telltale signs?
Yeah.
I might be being broken up with or close to being broken up with.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the obvious ones is when they start moving your work off of your desk and onto somebody else's or a big project. I mean, if they do that, that's certainly something I'd be perking up. If you're, you got to read the tea leaves of your. Hopefully, you're having one-on-one meetings regularly with your boss. Yeah. And if suddenly you're feeling like the tone is they're no longer like everything you say, they're real agreeable. Yeah, sure. No problem. And they don't give you any bona fide feedback, and they don't seem real engaged with what you're saying or what you're doing.
Oof,
that's a big one. I think having certainly the work moving off of your table, or if they switch you to an entirely different job altogether, that's a big one. If you're no longer invited to meetings, the rest of your staff is in these meetings, or they bring somebody else into a project that you're working on, and they say, well, we're going to give you some more support. If you start seeing people behind closed doors that you're closely supporting in with your boss, those are probably the things that I would be paying attention to.
Yeah. What do you do then?
You got to double down on what, your communication with your boss. And I would be, for me, I haven't had that problem because I'm regularly meeting every week with my boss and going through an agenda of, so I can stay on top of those things. But we always have to maintain good networks, You should always have never need to have your resume. Never tell a recruiter, I need to update my resume. I'll get it to you next week. So if you get laid off, you should already have your resume ready to go.
Yeah, you really should. It's too late at that point.
Yeah.
Back to the interview process. You did a very popular video on 10 things you should avoid revealing in the interview. I'm not going to make you list all 10, but because they can go watch that. But what are some real no-nos? And then I'm curious, does it happen a lot? Which is, I guess that's why you put the video out. So what are some of those biggies?
Yeah. Gosh, off the top of my head, I think the salary expectation question trips a lot of people up, and it's really more. People look at that as a really scary question because they feel like they have to play this dance with the recruiter.
I'm putting a stake in the ground, and I hope it's right.
Yeah, and so when you you refuse to answer the question, say, you tell me yours first, or I need to learn more about the opportunity before, and there is some validity to that. And what the recruiter will typically say is, well, let's go through the rest of the interview process, and then if you need any other information from me about the position, then I'm happy to share that with you, and so that you can make your decision. Because we've learned to be a little because we can't submit a candidate over to a hiring manager, put you through an entire panel.
And we don't know if salary expectations are realistic.
Yeah, I've wasted all these people's time, and then you get to the final, and then you're like 50 grand above where we can pay, and then it's like, now me, the recruiter, looks bad to my team.
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably a one where don't refuse to answer the salary question. Though you can kick the can down the road if you're not comfortable saying that yet. You could say, I just need a little bit more time to think. What other information can you give me about the role? And then get your clarification.
Right.
But you should know what your market value is, and based on the position,
right.
that's your job. It's not their job to tell you what they're going to pay you. It's your job to determine your market value. And if they fit into that, then that's
right.
what you should be assessing.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I think another mistake people make typically around salary is also is telling people that this is my most current rate of pay, because now you're locking yourself into that. They'll say, oh, well, if you're underpaid, or what if they can pay you more? Now you're locking yourself in because they're going to base it that, well, we're going to give you 5% above what you just made.
Right.
So now you're locking yourself in. So the salary thing is probably the one that I see most commonly trips people up.
Yeah.
Typically people will also, this is like a really common advice that goes around where they'll say at the end of the interview, is there anything about my candidacy that causes you pause that you won't move me forward that I can address?
Right.
It's too late by that time.
Yeah, I agree.
You should be asking that at the beginning.
What are you expecting them to do?
Because I always say, I get that one all the time. I go, no, you're good. Like I've already made my decision at that point in time. The time to ask that question, and maybe not that exact phrasing, but the time to ask that question is in the beginning of the interview so that you learn what they're looking for. And then you position yourself as the best fit.
agree. Is that more of a early on in the interview, you go, hey, when you have first impressions matter. So based on your impression of me on the resume and everything, I want to be able to address any potential gaps that you think that are there. Is that a good way to say that, or
I
no?
wouldn't even frame it that way, because that's showing weakness. You're framing yourself as like.
I agree, because I wouldn't say it at all, but I was trying to figure out.
What I would do is, again, you got to think of the analogy. The employer is the shopping for the car, and we're the selling of the car.
By the way, that's really good.
If they're walking into it looking for the car, what should a good car salesman do?
This car will meet all your needs.
What are you guys looking for?
Yeah.
What's your wish list?
Yeah.
Okay, I know your wish list. Let me move all these cars. I'm going to bring one up that's perfect for you. I'm not going to make you walk through my entire lot to find it.
Right. And I know you wanted this little feature, but let me show you the feature on this model.
Yeah. You're not going to
go. That essentially meets the same need. That's what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And if this one does, and if it doesn't have what you're looking for, show them why this one might also meet their needs.
That's the key. Yeah.
So if you put yourself into that mindset of there's the purchaser versus the buyer, like how do you market yourself?
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. All right. So I want to ask you your thoughts on some signs that we can see. We may not be able to ask it in the interview. Maybe we can. Can we do research and look at what vendors say about them? I don't know. But this is around things that companies say and do that you can figure out they're bad. They are not a good place to work. What are some of those red flags that we can do some research on or ask good questions in the process that we go, these are bad actions. They're saying bad things, they're doing bad things, and I don't want to be here. What pops to your mind on that one?
I mean, it's the same way a company assesses you in the interview process. The whole concept of behavior-based interviewing is your past performance is the best indicator of your future performance.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for them. If the person who was in that role before, it was a revolving door. They can't keep people in there longer than 6 months or a year. Every single person gets fired. You got to start asking yourself a question. Is it the person that you're hiring? Is it your hiring process? Or is it the boss? So I would be asking that question very early in the interview is, why is this position open? And that you'll learn a lot about the job and the culture there. And then how are you treated in the interview process? Is it smooth? Were you being considered at different steps? Were they accommodating? Those are two big indicators. I think it's all past performance is the best indicator of future performance. Or my favorite way to do it, if you're really trying to assess whether or not the company is good and you have a question mark about it, conduct your own references. So I would go and find people who used to work, not
that would be my starting point. I agree with that.
People who are not people who are actively working there, because you're never going to find. I could go around your studio and ask everybody like, hey, what's it like to work here?
Right.
And they're going to tell me it's great. I'm sure. By the way, I'm sure it's great.
Right.
But I could go off and ask somebody, like, maybe 2 or 3 people that used to work for that hiring manager in that department who now at other companies, and say, would you go back?
Right. I agree. But with a caveat, because I agree with that. I'd like to see that number be 5 to 7 people.
Sure.
And I'd also, in getting their feedback, I'd also say, what were the circumstances under which you left?
Yeah, I mean, of course.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
You want to know, because if there's somebody that's really healthy, and you can determine what why they left, and it seems healthy. Now, I think you can take that feedback to the
100%.
bank. Another thing I want to ask you, I love the name of your channel, Life After Layoff. I read some data several years ago that I cite from time to time on this show that losing a job, whether laid off, which happened to you, and I was laid off years ago, or fired. So whatever the situation is, when you lose your job, it is the psychological equivalent of losing a loved one.
Yeah.
And
grieving for sure.
It is. And so I would love to get your head and heart to talk to people. How do we heal? How do we move forward? What have you learned in your own journey, and then coaching and counseling others that you would recommend if it happens to you?
Yeah, so it is absolutely a loss. You have to go through the 5 stages of grief, and you have to really internalize. I think just compartmentalizing it and say it didn't happen, it's fine. Just ignoring the elephant in the room. You have to go into that space and really like feel the emotions and like process it and get pissed off.
Yeah.
And, tell them that they're all
That's
wrong and all that. So that's healthy to do that. But it's not healthy to continue to hold that energy for too terribly long.
Yeah.
I have always been the type that has addressed my issues head on.
Yeah.
If there was when I got laid off, the very first thing I did is I went up to, I was trying to buy a house with my wife. We had just moved to Tennessee, and I was told her, I'm going to buy you a house when we get here. It's going to be great. It's going to be better. We left the North and we came here, and we had plans to expand our family and all this stuff. And I walk in, I moved on Friday.
Yeah.
Had the moving van literally still in my driveway.
Oh, no.
And then Monday morning, I get this. It was my first day of work in Tennessee. I get an email from my boss's boss, the CHRO, and I get this meeting request, and I'm like, so I'm calling my boss and I go, do you know anything about this? And she's like, maybe it's just a step level meeting. She didn't even know.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I went into that meeting, and of course that's when I got the news. So I had to walk up to my wife, who was like unpacking boxes, and like we were just getting settled. We were in a rental house, but we were planning on starting to shop for a home. And I was like, so got some news.
Yeah. Oh no.
Might not want to unpack all the boxes just yet. And she's like, what do you mean? And
oh my God.
I said, well, I just got laid off. And she's like, you're kidding me? And so like the shock of it, I was just like 1,000-yard stare. And I waited 2 or 3 days. I went through that whole period, probably condensed. And I just woke up one day and I said, 2 days afterward, like on Wednesday, I woke up in the morning and I jumped out of bed and I'm like, I'm not going to feel sorry for myself.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hold this anger. Of course I was angry, felt all those emotions. They didn't know what they're doing. They just, they ended up laying off a whole bunch of people in the department, but I felt really angry at that time. And then I jumped out of bed on Wednesday morning. I said, you know what? I'm going to take ownership. I'm going to take control back. I'm no longer going to allow employer to determine when I can buy a house, where I can move, because they didn't even want me moving, like I was working remotely, but they were still trying to dictate that, where I could move, when I could have a baby, expand my family. Basically, I had an employer dictating everything. And the moment I was no longer useful to them, they let me go. They lay you off. And that was a really big wake up call for me to say, I'm never putting myself into that situation again. So I just jumped head into, I'm changing my life. And I decided at that point, I'm going to reclaim control of my career. And that's where kind of the channel, my channel kind of grew up from that whole concept of, I'm no longer going to be the victim in my career. I'm going to be in the driver's seat. I'm no longer going to let somebody else determine that.
Yeah, I love it. Tell people about your channel and how they can visit and what they're looking for and what they're going to get. Yeah,
so it's a Life After Layoff is the channel moniker. So if you search by A Life After Layoff, you'll probably see my face. And then I have a website, alifeafterlayoff.com, and I help people get back on their feet as quickly as they can. And it started off like, how can I help people get back on their feet more quickly through like resume training and like interview training and that sort of thing. But it really morphed into, over time, as I kind of honed my message, it really morphed into how to reclaim control and start to act like the CEO of your career.
Yeah,
because that's where so many people feel so disenfranchised, is they're helpless. They feel powerless. Yeah. They're completely reliant on an employer for all of their. I mean, I watched Dave's channel a lot, and it's the reclaiming control of your financial life.
That's right.
Have multiple streams of income, multiple ways to pay your bills, get your bills paid down so that you have so much exposure to risk.
Right. That's right.
And it's the same thing with your career. That's why you're here.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. And it's why I wanted you to come here. You're doing really good work. You've got a really great insight because of your HR background, and also walking through the very valley that you're helping people with. And I think that's something we have in common. That's why I do what I do is from a place of pain and frustration and kind of rising from the ashes. So totally get it. You're a good man. You're doing good stuff. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah. Then rising tide, we can just rise that's the awareness and change, we can change it. It happens at this level. It's not going to happen at that level, unfortunately.
Isn't that the truth? Well, you're doing good work, Brian. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You bet. If you want more from Brian Creeley, please check out his popular YouTube channel, A Life After Layoff. I hope that conversation encouraged you. We'll be back real soon.